So let me just start by stating, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Vivian Schiller. I'm the executive director of Aspen Digital. Aspen Digital is a program of the Aspen Institute that focuses on technology and media and its intersection with society. My background is a long-time news media executive for countless news organizations, which I will not list here, but you can look them up. I've been really looking forward to this session today because I think it's an important and maybe unexamined issue in journalism today in this era of so many conflicts around the world, but particularly in this case the conflicts, the war in Ukraine and the wars, plural, in and around Israel. I want to start by stating the blindingly obvious, which is the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Israel are extremely different. Their origins, the dynamics, there's really, they're completely different. I don't want to, with the implication of us talking about these two war situations, don't want to imply that there's anything similar about them. But the journalists in both of these regions face a similar and unique challenge, which is the challenge of fearlessly and rigorously pursuing journalism, even when it leads you to reporting against your own government. That is easier to do. That's never easy, but it's easier to do in peacetime. There's a unique additional set of complexities and challenges when you are reporting on your own government when your nation is under threat and at war. And yet, we are journalists, and report is what we do, even when in face of accusations that any reporting that criticizes the government or can be seen as critical of the government, people will complain that you are aiding and abetting the enemy. So in that, our two panelists today share this unique and incredibly difficult challenge. So let me introduce our incredible panelists. Sevgil Musaieva is a Ukrainian journalist from Crimea and editor-in-chief of Ukrayinska Pravda, the Ukrainian newspaper. She is the recipient of the 2022 Committee to Protect Journalists International Press Freedom Award and was named as Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2022, an incredibly skilled and brave journalist who I've had the pleasure of knowing now for a couple of years. And immediately to my right, Alona Vinograd is the CEO of Shomrim, the Center for Media and Democracy. So Shomrim, you may not have heard of it. It is a fairly new news organization based in Israel. It is a nonprofit, it is independent, and it focuses on investigative journalism and has been, as far as I'm concerned, and I've been delighted and honored to serve as on the advisory board of Shomrim, has done some incredibly brave investigative journalism and pursues the facts wherever the facts lead them, sometimes to places that are uncomfortable, many times to places that are uncomfortable for the current Israeli administration. Alona was previously director of the Center for Democratic Values and Institutions in Jerusalem, where she was working to safeguard the independence of Israel's judiciary system, helped bolster government institutions, and increased government transparency as an engine of trust. So you come to this not really as a journalist, but somebody who has been vigorously and actively working to protect the institutions of democracy, of which, of course, journalism is one. Okay, so let's get into it. We have a decent amount of time, which I'm pleased about. So I want to ask both Sevgil and Alona to talk, first of all, just talk a little bit about your news institutions for a few minutes, just so we have some context as we get into the current situation. So Sevgil, I begin with you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for joining this panel on Saturday at 10 a.m. I know that it's a little bit challenging, but at the same time it means it's valuable for you. And thank you for your interest of topic of Ukraine and Israel. Ukrayinska Pravda. Actually, this year I have a little anniversary, 10 years of my editor-in-chief of Ukrayinska Pravda. In my life, yes, I was 27 when I joined Ukrayinska Pravda as editor-in-chief. Ukrayinska Pravda was founded in 2000 by two brave journalists in the total censorship, Georgi Gangadze and Olena Pritula. Then Georgi Gangadze was killed, and it led to accusation against the government, and then protests against the government, and later it transformed to Orange Revolution. And Ukrayinska Pravda, this is more than one of the popular online media in the country. This is also the sign of democratic transformation of our country. I mean, we played a significant role in 2004 Orange Revolution with covering the protests, and of course 2013, 2014. During Revolution of Dignity, it also was about civil movement and covering the protests freely. So we kind of a pioneer of independent journalism and investigative journalism in our country. And of course, for the last 10 years, we also reported from the front line. Before the invasion started in 2022, we already experienced a lot and faced with some challenges, not only Russian propaganda, but pressure from the government, from authorities. I mean, previous president, current president. But of course, maybe later I will tell you a little bit about challenges during the wartime and press freedom.
Thank you, Sevgil. And Alona, tell us a little bit more about Shomrim.
Yes, thank you. So Shomrim, as you mentioned, is a relatively new organization. We were established in December 2019. And the idea, we're a non-profit media news organization. We have journalists who work at Shomrim, but we collaborate with for-profit media outlets, meaning that we focus only on investigative journalism, and the stories that we do at Shomrim are published in Israel and also outside of Israel in leading media outlets. Our editor, Eyal Avrahami, and Uri Blau, one of our reporters, are also here. I think you mentioned, Vivian, I come from the world of NGOs and nonprofit, and Eyal, our editor, is a veteran journalist, and we run the organization together, and that's a very unique model in Israel. We're the first of its kind, and it required a lot of work within the journalism community in Israel, gaining their trust and making them understand the importance of investigative reporting and what we can offer in Shomrim, doing in-depth stories, which the Israeli media currently is lacking very much. Over 90% of our stories are printed in different media outlets from all sectors of Israeli society. We work in various kinds of collaborations with journalists from the other media outlets, stories that come only from our newsroom. And our hope is that this model, which is very common in the United States, will also have more examples of it in Israel. Currently, we're the only ones who are doing it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that background. Okay, let's now bring things up to date. And I'm going to come back to you, Sevgil, because you've been, Ukraine has never been not under some form of threat, but of course things changed dramatically a little over 3 years ago with the Russian invasion. And talk to us about I know that had an impact on you, of course, which is part of the point of this panel, as a citizen and as a human living in a nation under attack. But when it comes to your journalism, how did that impact the way you approached your reporting in Ukraine?
First of all, I want to start that I'm not only Ukrainian, I'm also Crimean Tatar, and I grew up in Crimea. And you know that the aggression of Russia started with the occupation of Crimea in 2014. So it was also a big personal trauma for me, because I became divided with my family, for example, with my parents and with my whole big family, because in Crimean Tatar community we have this kind of traditions. And actually, before I worked in business reporting, and then I joined Ukrayinska Pravda, and one of the issues I joined Ukrayinska Pravda was the occupation of Crimea in 2014, and it was, oh, sorry, it was a, sorry, it was earth in Ukraine. It just finished. I'm sorry. And then I was ready that it's just the beginning. I mean, the occupation of Crimea, and even yesterday I met some of my colleagues from different medias, from different programs, Reuters Institute of Journalism, Nieman Foundation, and they told me, okay, you said that it will be full-scale invasion later, so you were ready for that, and actually we will not take it so seriously. So I was ready that full-scale invasion will take place, not maybe in 2022, but I understood that Putin will never stop with just Crimea or Donbass. Before that time, Ukrayinska Pravda mostly published investigative reporting. Of course, we covered the war, but let's be honest, it took like 10% of all content in 2021 or 2022, in the beginning of 2022. When the war started, of course, everything has changed dramatically. So 90% of our content was about war, and it was actually about news 24/7. All the whole team of Ukrayinska Pravda, more than 100 people, started just to publish stories about what's going on in the front line, because the full-scale invasion, it meant that it started in different places, and sometimes we even didn't, of course, we didn't have our reporters in these cities, for example, in south of Ukraine or eastern part of Ukraine, and some of our readers also helped to deliver information about what's going on. So it was about providing information for our people, and in the first days of invasion, I didn't mention that a daily audience of Ukrayinska Pravda before the war was around 1 million unique visitors. In the first days of war, it was 7.5, 5 million unique visitors per day. We had 1 billion views. So people, 1 billion views in the first months of war. So people consumed news, and they didn't take seriously what's going on, with political agenda, with corruption, with everything. Also journalists, our team of Ukrayinska Pravda mostly focus on what's going on with, for example, war crimes. We understood that Russians committed war crimes, and we started to gather this information about different places. Also, one of the important thing we focus on was Russian sanction and sanctioning more Russians, because we saw that maybe it will help to stop war as soon as possible. And then I remember in the first days we focused to find all assets of Russian oligarchs, to deliver this information to embassies, Western embassies, and actually some of assets of these oligarchs were arrested, yachts, for example, and jets. And then maybe in 1 month we understood that corruption didn't disappear from Ukraine. It is still there. Political agenda is still there. Even in existential threat, there is some misconduct that took place. And we had a bit discussion actually inside the team, not to harm, or how we can do this journalism, not to harm the country and not to destroy the support of Ukraine, because for us it's not just the war. This is the war for existence of our country, the right for exist. And actually it took some time, and then not only in our team, in all investigative teams inside the country. And in autumn 2022, we understood that we have to cover, of course, domestic issues and corruption. And our first investigations actually were in cooperation with, for example, Radio Liberty, and it was about deputy head of one of the administration in Kiev, or in regions. And what actually changed, that authorities reacted after our investigation. Some of authorities were fired while we published this. So, and we had a discussion about how to cover corruption and is it necessary? And we understood that it's necessary because in times of war, misconducts literally cost human lives, and it means that, for example, after the end of the war, if people acknowledge that at the time when, for example, our soldiers or our army paid a huge price for Ukraine to be independent, at the same time some misconducts of officials took place, it will be unfair for Ukrainians. And at the same time, I mentioned before that for our media, it was important to continue democratic transformation of our country. I mean, the Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, and to make Ukraine more transparent, more European. And we understood that war, even in war times, it is possible that Ukraine could stay democratic state. So yes, we are at war, but we can be a democracy at war, and we can fight with Russia only with help with the truce and with European values, and with, of course, among European values is the freedom of speech. So, and for us it was a very important decision to make, that we covered it, and we'll be honest with our population, with our people, not to hide unpleasant facts about what's going on. But it actually helped us to do positive changes even in times of war. For example, in procurement which is, of course, was...
That's where the money is.
Yes, for the money, and other spheres. It helped us improve, and in Ukraine, press matters. And even in times of war, press can do positive changes and can change a situation in different spheres. So, and it's an important sign that even in existential threat, we are still able to continue this democratic transformation of the country and to change the things.
Was there any, when you were having these discussions within your newsroom, particularly in the early days, about continuing to report on corruption and other issues, within your own country, was there unanimity in your newsroom about covering these things? Were any of your colleagues reluctant to report negatively in the event, thinking that it might not be the patriotic thing to do when your country is at existential risk?
Of course, we had different vision, but I prefer maybe to speak about, for example, we have one prominent investigative reporter in our team who is Mikhail Tkach, one of the famous investigative reporters in our country, and he said that, and actually it was his quote, that it will be very unfair that after the war people acknowledge that all these misconducts took place, and we didn't nothing as a journalist to stop this and to change something. And for us, yes, our country at war, we are risking our lives even to cover this war, but at the same time, we can't just ignore some bad things inside the country, and it's very valuable, it's very important, and actually all of our, even among Ukrainian journalists, it was a big discussion, so some of them decided not to cover corruption, but then in a few months or 1 year, everyone understood that we have to.
Right. So one more follow-up question to you, and then I'll come to you, Alona. So when you began to publish these stories about wrongdoing, what was the response from the public, from your readers?
Readers supported us, and the most interesting thing that our colleagues, for example, that this war, I already mentioned that it is war for the right of our country to exist, and that's why a lot of our colleagues, a lot of our friends joined an army. And maybe I will later tell you about some Ukrayinska Pravda journalists who joined an army. So, and they supported us. They told us, okay, this is also a very important front line, just to continue some changes in anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine. So, and our readers supported us. Sometimes, of course, they became a little bit skeptical about maybe is it a good time to report about this or not. Some of them, not the whole our audience, but mostly yes. People people were waiting for this. People said that Ukrayinska Pravda DNA is about investigative reporting, so we have to continue investigative reporting even in times of war.
Okay, so Alona, let's come to you. So this is a fresher, newer situation in Israel. Of course, everything changed on October 7th, and that must have been among the many changes for you as a citizen and in your country. Of course, this had a profound impact on the work that you do and the way that you can proceed with Shomrim. So, talk a little bit about what changed that day, and of course, since then, the evolving set of conflicts and unfolding situation difficult situation in Gaza.
Yes, so like you mentioned, October 7th came very unexpectedly. It was very dramatic, very difficult day. We had an investigation that had to do with cyber, something that we worked on for months, that was supposed to be its first story came out on Thursday, and there were follow-up stories that were planned to Sunday, and then October 7th broke, and I think we all, as citizen Israel, is a very, very small country. The first day, we're all in shock and really scared for our lives. Some live closer to the area. We were all in safe rooms for several hours, and then it stopped. And on Sunday, the first thing we had to do is try to understand the situation, when no one could understand the situation at that point. The next few days were utter chaos, 24/7 news, a lot of misinformation, trying to understand what took place on that Saturday and the following days. I guess for us, it really put us in a situation that we had to think, first of all, what to do with all the investigations that we've been working on for months that has no connection to what happened on that day. And what is our job from that day forward, because Shomrim is focused on investigative reporting, and investigative reporting takes time. You can't, report something in depth with supporting data within 24 hours. So in the first, and there was a lot of, I think, emotional support that was needed to the team. We attended funerals, visited friends in hospitals, helped friends that were evacuated from their homes on the one side, and on the other side, we had to bring all the staff together and work. So the decision was, in the first 2 weeks, I guess, was to focus on what is known more as explanatory journalism, because the subject were so delicate, and there were issues that you didn't even know if they were real, and the numbers, and so we touched on issues like the hostages and the families, the situation of the people that were evacuated from their homes and were placed in hotels throughout Israel. So that and other issues, that took place for the first week or two. And we started working, I think, more gradually than usual, in a more sensitive way, to work on back on our investigative stories, on collaborations with media outlets in Israel out of Israel, on international investigations. I think one of our biggest investigation at the time was something that Uri, our reporter who's here, led, about one of Hamas's financiers that was published in CNN and led to EU sanction on that person and ultimately to his arrest. But that took several weeks after the attack. As time went by, I think exactly like you said in a way, we learned that the regular, if you can call it, misconduct, struggles of Israeli society did not disappear. Some of them were even affected more by the situation. And we went back and dug deep into civil situation that has to do with education or health. And we went back to looking deep into what our government and decision makers are doing in regards to the war. And in regards to the effects, it's still going on, so this is something that's evolving every day. But what it did, what the war and the government's handling of the war did inside of it into Israeli society. There are a lot of neglected fields in Israel, and we felt it is our responsibility to provide it to the public in a responsible way, in the hope that it will make impact and it will change, whether it's things that have to do with decision regarding financial steps that the government is taking, whether it's social issues. One of the things that we learned, for example, just give examples of stories that were published in the past few weeks. We learned that, one of our reporters learned that Russians that were murdered in the attack, and that their Judaism is not certain in terms of the way the government sees, are buried outside of the Jewish cemetery.
They weren't considered Jewish enough to
They
be
weren't
buried in a
considered,
Jewish cemetery.
they were
Even
Jewish
if they were,
enough to be murdered or serve in the army and fall in the war, but they weren't Jewish enough. And we published that story. It received, I'm happy to say that it received a lot of attention. It was translated into Russian and was published in Russian media outlets in Israel. And we believe that will be something that will derive change. So this is not about the war directly, the response of Israel in Gaza, but it has to do with our daily life. We had several stories about the police forces in Israel. I don't know how much the audience is aware, but there are ongoing demonstrations in Israel about the situation, especially about the way the government is dealing with the hostages who are still held in captivity by Hamas. And there is a lot of, the police is really trying to quiet it and oppress it very vigorously.
Quiet the protests.
Yes.
Okay.
And there are protests on different issues, on the war in Gaza and about the people who are evacuated from their homes and are still in hotels almost 6 months after the war with no solutions. So we're focusing on these kinds of issues.
So certainly, one of the big there are countless differences between the situations in Ukraine and Israel, and certainly one of them is most of the reasonable world is, appalled by that Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the world is with Ukraine in seeking their long-time viability and sovereignty. Israel's a little more complicated in that the current administration is extremely divisive, including inside Israel, of course. And as time has gone on and the body count in Gaza has gone up and up and up, is coming under more and more criticism, like I said, both within Israel and the rest of the world. In that context, did you feel after October 7th in reporting on critical reporting about the police or the administration, did you feel any pressure to pull back from that reporting out of a sense of patriotism for a country that, you know, Israel, which has so recently suffered this brutal attack, and now ongoing threats, of course, now from Iran and others?
Yes, well, absolutely. As you said, Israel is a very patriotic country. Criticizing the government in a time of war, like this panelist stated, is not taken lightly. On the one hand, like you described, we see a dramatic growth in the people that follow Shomrim and our stories and our newsletter. But on the other hand, we definitely felt or feel the pressure. For us, it's mostly tiring legal procedures and threats of legal procedures from government ministers, which is, of course, their way to bury us in legal paperwork and not do our work. We are a relatively small organization. For us, it keeps our lawyer busy and happy maybe, but for us, it's just a way to show that we're doing the right thing and we're putting our efforts in the right place.
Yeah. So the response coming from the government is the form of these legal maneuvers.
Exhausting procedures.
Yeah. I was trying to think in preparing for this panel about whether there's any precedent for this in the United States, and the only time that I could think of was immediately after the 9/11 attacks, and there was certainly for a period of time in certain quarters sort of a movement in the United States to not criticize any of the actions of the U.S. response to those attacks. And I was speaking with Jamil Jaffer, who's maybe here somewhere, here from the Knight First Amendment Center, who reminded me that about a speech that the then Attorney General John Ashcroft gave, basically admonishing anyone who would question what the U.S. government was doing. And let me tell you, the U.S. government was doing a lot of very dicey things. And he tacitly threatened, wrote this down, those who would, quote, scare peace-loving people with phantoms of lost liberty. And then he went on to say, my message is this, he's sort of alluding to both the press and to any critics, your tactics only aid terrorists, for they erode our national unity and diminish our resolves. They give ammunition to America's enemies and pause to America's friends. So, you know, this kind of in this way, trying to put pressure and turn public opinion against journalists who would question what the U.S. government was doing. So, you know, in this case, you're getting it from legal maneuvers. I want to ask Sevgil how you're experiencing that in Ukraine, the kind of pressure from the government, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I mentioned that investigative reporting matters in Ukraine, and after we published some stories, some of authorities were fired, and actually our society wants to have some changes in transparency, anti-corruption efforts. That's why, of course, after this series of investigations, some of authorities understood us and realized that we are the real threat for them, for example, for their schemes, for everything. And they started kind of a short campaigns of trying to discredit some journalists, for example, and law enforcement were involved in such activity. For example, the last case was with one of the prominent investigative team in our country, Bigusinfo. Security surveillance took place, and actually they filmed how some members of this team used kind of cannabis and drugs, and they would try to discredit the the team, but in Ukrainian society it didn't work like that, because we realized that, of course, this is something that you would try to do just to discredit journalists, and but it harmed, first of all, law enforcement in that time. How they try, of course, some online bullying took place, for example, of course, some activities from law enforcement, also some manipulation, for example, that some of our journalists could be drafted to the army, and it's also kind of cooling effect for journalists, for example. The last case that took place with Следство.Info, after the investigation about one of the deputy head of security service, some of guys with this security service tried to draft one of members of the team, but journalists reported about this, and after that, this guy was actually fired from a security service. So you see that some of efforts to undermine the role of journalism took place, but at the same time, in our country, journalists fight back, and fight back successfully. And yes, it's about kind of a battle, and for us, I mean, we have good examples of independent journalism in the country. It's important. So we, of course, our landscape has changed dramatically after the start of the war. We have, for example, United Marathon, which is kind of a light state propaganda. It's about positive newsmaking, etc. But at the same time, we have independent journalism, and which does great investigative reporting about the country and the different things, misconducts, etc. And it plays important role. So, yeah, economic pressure as well. For example, some of authorities can ask, for example, advertisers not to place, for example, advertisement in some of media, for example, in Ukrayinska Pravda. Yes, that's why it's important to support independent media in Ukraine, and we actually started our fundraising campaign not so far, because during the war, you know that financial model is not sustainable how it was, for example, before the war, in terms of economic situation in the country. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of pressure. I want to turn to the personal for a minute, and we'll go to questions in a couple of minutes. I mean, you are clearly demonstrated in the work that you do, and your words here this morning, your commitment to the journalism and the investigative journalism, and to following the facts wherever they lead you. But you are both also human beings, and leading teams of human beings who are citizens of countries that you and that you feel very patriotic towards. I know both of you do, and we're both deeply affected. Ukraine and Israel are both small countries. You both know people directly. In some cases, I know very close to you, who were directly impacted or killed in the war. And I want to understand a little bit about how you approach your work. How that impacts your work. It must be extremely difficult. And on the other hand, perhaps it gives you more resolve. And I'd just like to understand that a little bit better.
You're absolutely right that this is not even a dilemma just to be a citizen or a journalist. It's a dilemma of human being and journalists sometimes. The most challenging, for example, for me personally, in these last 2 years of war was the case when I had to inform my sister that her partner was killed in Ukraine. Filmmaker Brent Renault, and I had to say to her that he was killed. That was very difficult in terms of human being, and in terms of that I'm her sister, first of all. Of course, there are some moral dilemma that took place every single day. You have to do some difficult decisions. For example, publish or not to publish the list. For example, in the first days of war, we published the list of all soldiers that came to Ukraine. And at the same time, I realized that they're a few kilometers away from our families, and it could be dangerous. Or publish or not to publish the story that one of your colleagues was captured by Russians and their relatives against that, and you have to think about, first of all, their decision, but at the same time, maybe it will help to release him. And other things, and not unfortunately, this is, so the war is the time for honest decisions that you make, actually, and some of our colleagues decided to join an army, for example, and last year, for example, one of our videographers joined an army, and he said, it was his statement he delivered to our readers, that I have only the one country, and I will have never any one in the future. So I want to live in Ukraine and want to protect this country. It was his decision. He joined. He left the team. Few months ago, another one, investigative reporter. She is absolutely brilliant, amazing. We trained her from 19 years, so she was just a student when she joined the team. And she was the only one investigative reporter who covered law enforcement. And then now she is 25, and she also just informed me, okay, I want to join an army. I'm young and I have no kids, and I think that people have to protect their country, that they are young and they have no kids. And this is sad because now we don't have a reporter to cover corruption in law enforcement, and this is important. And you have to spend years and years to train another one journalist. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the first emotions that come to mind when I think of that Saturday is this helpless position you're in. You know, I was texting with friends that live in the kibbutzim that were attacked. One of them was texting me, there are Hamas terrorists inside our house right now, and you feel so helpless. But then I thought, in a way, how privileged we are that we have this tool of journalism and what we can do. And one of the things that we did in Shomrim, which is not really our mandate, but we felt we needed to do something, is we established an emergency fund for journalists who cover the war from the front line. Many journalists were first arrivals on the scene on October 7th, and 2 were murdered, and they just had no support, and we felt that if the journalistic community will not be assisted and aided, they'll just break down, and we can lose them. So in 3 weeks, we established an emergency fund that raised over $400,000 from amazing supporters in Israel and throughout the world. We gave almost 150 grants for emotional aid, and we keep following, I think, the position of Shomrim, that because we work with all media outlets in Israel from all sectors of society, we were able to be in touch with them and provide them with this aid. You know, Israeli journalists are very proud and strong, and it was very hard for them, I think, to admit that this was needed, but it was, and this was a very, on the one hand, humbling, but also empowering experience that we really were able, and we spoke with, I spoke with several of them after, and they said the support was life-changing for them. The psychological system in Israel, the one that the government provides is almost non-existent. You have to go to private. It costs a lot of money, and that's where we wanted to help. So I think doing that, in addition to our journalistic work in the first few weeks, really gave us the energy, I guess, to continue in doing because just like you said, it affected us on a very personal ways. There were no schools. I have children, you know, the schools were closed for a few weeks. You had to be at home, but had to be at work. You had to go to funerals. You had to, my partner's a physician who works in the hospital, coming back with stories that are just unbelievable. And as the director of the organization, I also felt that there is a growing support, personal support that's needed to the newsroom and to the staff, and it kind of brought us in a way closer together. We had exactly the same story of a journalist who decided, from the ultra-Orthodox community, decided to go to the army, which is a very rare thing. So differences but similarities in a way between the two countries.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we want to take a couple of questions with our remaining time. So who would like to, I can't see, so, okay, go ahead. Hi.
Hello. Thank you for a wonderful conversation. Taras Yatsenko, I lead the local independent media in Lviv, Ukraine. I would like to ask both speakers, what is the difference between the approaches of Ukrainian and Israeli journalists covering the war, and also journalists that came from all different countries? Because I think that's the topic that maybe we didn't cover strongly here. And one smaller remark also to what Vivian said, that Ukraine and Israel are small countries, so in comparison, yes, but also in comparison to the scope of geography of Russia, or the US, but Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, was probably the same size as France, the biggest country of Europe. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say maybe the deep understanding of the country, and in terms, first of all, speakers they heard and they asked, for example, because I think Ukrainian journalists understand very clear why the speaker, for example, matters, or this speaker is not a good speaker in this topic, for example. Yeah, I will say that one. The Ukrainian journalists, they better understand the reality, this history, and the background, political agenda. So, yeah, more
Nuanced, yeah,
yes, yeah,
of course. Understanding of sources, yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I didn't get the
question is how it was about, how do you feel as Israeli, tell me if I got this wrong, but you know, as Israeli journalists, how do you feel the way that you're covering the war, how does that compare with foreign correspondents who are coming in and covering the war? I have that more or less right? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Israel is a very complex, I think, society to understand. The conflict is a very complex issue to understand. I think many of the journalists who cover the war from outside of Israel are in Israel and not in Gaza, so there's a lot of information we can see that we're not hearing and we're not receiving. There's a big lack of news and information from Gaza because of the difficulty to go into that area. But in terms of what's going on in Israel, I think because of the complexity and the sensitivity of the issue, you need Israelis. But I think it's also important, that's why we collaborate with international media outlets, that the way we bring out the story will be something that audience from outside of Israel can understand. There are cultural differences that we learned with working with international journalists that we are not aware of as Israelis, but in order for them to understand the Israeli story, we have to present it in a different way. So these collaborations are important from foreign and local journalists.
Thank you. I don't know where the mics are, so here we go. Thank you. And if you can introduce yourself and your affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for this very important, interesting panel. My name is Yael Braudo-Bahat. I am one of the two co-directors of Women Who Wage Peace. It's an Israeli grassroots movement. And my question is to Alona. To what extent do you focus on the lack of women now and before, but definitely now, around the decision-making table? There is no woman at all, no women at all at the work cabinet. There's only one or two women in the security cabinet. And to what extent are you interested in the grassroots efforts of civil society and specifically of women's organizations to bring about peace and to bring the voice of peace and not only the conflict and the war?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. One of the things that Shomrim is based on, it was one of the reasons we created Shomrim, is to bring voice to those not represented around the decision-making tables. In the current government, it's so extreme. No minorities, no women, no. So we are very much focused on it. We try to bring diversity into our newsroom and also in our investigations. I wish we could do more. That's the, we want to bring as many voices as possible. I am an admirer of the social society community in Israel, Israeli NGOs. I think they saved the country after October 7th. I was active in several of them where the government didn't function at all. And we work in collaboration with Organization for Social Change. They are the ones who are helping us reach impact, because we tell the story, but they try to make the policy change afterwards. So for us, it's crucial in our work.
Great. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I just want to say before we end, a huge thank you and so much gratitude to both of you for the really important and brave work that you're doing in your news organization. So thank you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Please, we ask you to leave the room to allow the police to carry out checks, and please exit through this door, and not by there, but this. Per favore, chiediamo di lasciare la sala per permettere alla polizia di svolgere dei controlli, chiediamo di uscire da questa porta.